The sun was shining brightly as the English Express left the station. The train moved smoothly along the tracks, its polished windows reflecting the clear blue sky. Inside, passengers settled into their seats, chatting softly and sipping their tea. Lisa, a young woman with short brown hair and bright eyes, sat near the window, enjoying the view. She loved traveling. By train it felt like an adventure every time. Sitting across from her was Mr. Thomas, an older gentleman with a neatly trimmed mustache and round glasses. Next to him sat Mrs. Baker, a friendly woman with curly gray hair and a pearl necklace. "Such a lovely day for a journey," Mrs. Baker said with a warm smile. "Yes, and this train is wonderful," Lisa replied. "It's my first time on the English Express." Mr. Thomas adjusted his glasses. This train is famous. Many interesting things happen here." He chuckled softly. Just then, the train gave a slight jolt as it picked up speed. Lisa looked around. The carriage was full of travelers reading books, chatting, or gazing out the windows. A waiter in a crisp uniform walked by, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. Everything seemed peaceful. Suddenly, Mrs. Baker gasped. "Oh no, my necklace! It's gone!" Lisa and Mr. Thomas turned to her in surprise. "Are you sure?" Lisa asked. Mrs. Baker nodded, looking distressed. "I was wearing it just a moment ago. It was right here, around my neck." Lisa glanced at the floor and the seats around them. There was no sign of the necklace. Maybe it fell. Mr. Thomas suggested, leaning down to check under the table. Mrs. Baker shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I was sitting right here, and now it's gone." Lisa's heart raced a little. A missing necklace on a train. This sounded like the beginning of a mystery. "Don't worry," Lisa said, determined. "We'll find it." Mr. Thomas nodded. "Yes, we'll help you, Mrs. Baker. Let's think. When was the last time you saw your necklace?" Mrs. Baker took a deep breath. "Just before the train left the station. I touched it, just to check, and now it's missing." Lisa looked around the train car. Passengers were still talking and reading, unaware of what had happened. Someone must have seen something. She turned back to Mrs. Baker. "We need to ask a few questions." Mr. Thomas smiled. "A mystery to solve. This journey just got more interesting." Lisa nodded, ready to begin the investigation. Lisa took a deep breath and looked around the train car. The mystery had begun. "We should ask the people nearby," she said to Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Baker. Mr. Thomas nodded. "Yes, someone might have seen something." Lisa turned to the woman sitting behind them. She had short black hair and was reading a book. Lisa smiled politely. "Excuse me," Lisa said. "Did you see a necklace?" The woman looked up, surprised. "A necklace?" "Yes," Lisa said. "Mrs. Baker's necklace is missing." The woman frowned and shook her head. "No, I didn't see anything. Sorry." Lisa thanked her and moved on. Next, she approached a man wearing a blue suit. He was drinking tea and looking out the window. "Excuse me, sir," Lisa said. "Can I ask you a question?" The man turned to her and smiled. "Of course. Did you see a necklace?" Lisa asked. "It was around Mrs. Baker's neck, but now it's missing." The man thought for a moment. "I didn't see a necklace, but I did see someone standing near your seat earlier." Lisa's eyes widened. "Who?" The man pointed toward the end of the train car. "A young boy. He had a red backpack." He was looking around. Then he walked away quickly. Lisa turned to Mr. Thomas. "A clue." Mrs. Baker looked hopeful. "Maybe he found my necklace." Lisa nodded. "Let's find him and ask." They walked down the aisle, looking for the boy. As they passed by another table, Lisa stopped and turned to a waiter. "Excuse me," she said. "Did you see a boy with a red backpack?" The waiter nodded. "Yes, he went to the next car a few minutes ago." Lisa turned back to Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Baker. "Let's go." They carefully stepped into the next train car. The atmosphere was different here, quieter, with fewer passengers. Lisa scanned the seats, and then, finally, she saw him. A young boy with short blonde hair was sitting near the window, his red backpack beside him. He was looking at something in his hands. Lisa approached gently. "Hello." The boy looked up. "Hi," Lisa smiled. "My name is Lisa." "What's your name?" "Ben," the boy replied. Lisa sat across from him. "Ben, I have a question. Did you find a necklace?" Ben blinked. "A necklace?" "Yes," Lisa said. "Mrs. Baker's necklace is missing. We're looking for it." Ben hesitated for a moment. Then, slowly, he opened his hand. Inside was a shiny pearl necklace. Mrs. Baker gasped. "That's mine." Lisa smiled at Ben. "Where did you find it?" Ben looked nervous. "It was on the floor." "I was going to give it to the waiter." Lisa nodded. "That was very kind of you." Mrs. Baker smiled warmly. "Thank you, Ben. You found my necklace." Ben looked relieved. "I'm glad." Mr. Thomas chuckled. "Well, mystery solved." Lisa looked at the necklace and then back at Ben. Something still didn't feel right. Lisa looked at Ben and the necklace in his hand. Something didn't seem right. "Ben, you said you found the necklace on the floor?" she asked. Ben nodded. "Yes, near the seats over there." Lisa turned to Mrs. Baker. "Did you feel the necklace fall?" Mrs. Baker shook her head. "No, I didn't even notice it was gone until just now." Mr. Thomas stroked his chin. "Then maybe it didn't just fall. Maybe someone took it and dropped it later." Lisa looked around the train car. "Let's check for more clues." She walked carefully along the aisle, looking at the floor and the seats. Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Baker followed closely behind. Then, near the luggage area, Lisa spotted something small and shiny. She bent down and picked it up. "A pearl," she said. Mrs. Baker gasped. "That's from my necklace." Lisa looked around. If a pearl fell here, maybe the necklace was here before it ended up on the floor. Mr. Thomas nodded. "Let's see if anyone saw something." Lisa turned to a man reading a newspaper. "Excuse me, sir. Did you see anything unusual here?" The man lowered his newspaper. "Unusual? I did see a young girl standing near the luggage area a few minutes ago." Lisa's eyes widened. "What did she look like?" The man thought for a moment. "She had dark hair and was wearing a yellow sweater." Lisa thanked him and turned to her friends. "We have another clue," she said. "Let's find the girl in the yellow sweater." They walked through the train car, looking carefully at each passenger. After a few minutes, Lisa spotted her. A girl with dark hair and a yellow sweater was sitting near the window, looking out at the passing countryside. Lisa approached her gently. "Hi there." The girl turned and smiled. "Hi, my name is Lisa," Lisa said. "What's your name?" "I'm Emma," the girl replied. Lisa sat across from her. "Emma, we're looking for information about a missing necklace. Did you see anything near the luggage area?" Emma's eyes widened. "Oh, I did see something." Lisa leaned in. "What did you see?" Emma pointed toward the back of the train car. A man was standing near the luggage. He looked around, then walked away quickly. Lisa exchanged a glance with Mr. Thomas. What did he look like? Emma thought for a moment. He was tall, with a gray jacket and a black hat. Lisa looked around the train. "Do you see him now?" Emma shook her head. "No, but I think he went to the next car." Lisa stood up. "Then that's where we're going next." She turned to Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Baker. "We have a suspect." Lisa, Mr. Thomas, and Mrs. Baker stepped into the next train car. The passengers were chatting, reading, or looking out the window as the train moved smoothly along the tracks. Lisa scanned the car carefully. "We're looking for a tall man in a gray jacket and a black hat," she reminded them. "Mrs. Baker pointed toward the back. "Look, over there." A man wearing a gray jacket and a black hat was sitting near the window. He was holding a newspaper, but his eyes moved nervously. Lisa and Mr. Thomas walked toward him. Lisa took a deep breath. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up, surprised. "Yes." Lisa smiled politely. "We're looking for a missing necklace." "Have you seen one?" The man blinked and shook his head. "No, I don't think so." Mr. Thomas glanced at the seat next to him. "Do you mind if we look around?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Go ahead." Lisa carefully looked at the floor. Nothing. She checked under the seat. Still nothing. Then she noticed something shiny near the man's back. She pointed. "What's that?" The man followed her gaze and frowned. Slowly, he reached down and picked up the small object. Mrs. Baker gasped. "That's my necklace." The man looked confused. "Oh, I didn't know it was there." He handed it to Lisa. Lisa examined it closely. "It looks like the clasp is broken. It must have fallen when someone walked by." Mrs. Baker sighed in relief. "I'm so glad we found it." Lisa turned to the man. "Thank you for giving it back." The man nodded. "Of course. I'm sorry for the confusion." Mr. Thomas smiled. "It was a mystery, but we solved it together." Mrs. Baker put the necklace in her purse. "I'll have it fixed as soon as we arrive." Lisa turned to Mr. Thomas. This was a good lesson in asking questions and finding information. Mr. Thomas nodded. "Yes, and we learned useful words along the way." Lisa looked at Mrs. Baker. "Are you happy now?" Mrs. Baker smiled. "Very happy. Thank you for helping me." Lisa beamed. "Anytime, that's what detectives do." The train continued moving forward, and the mystery was solved. Lisa, Mr. Thomas, and Mrs. Baker sat comfortably in their seats as the train continued its journey. The mystery was solved, and everyone felt relieved. Mr. Thomas smiled. "That was an exciting mystery, and we learned a lot of useful English along the way." Lisa nodded. "Let's review some important phrases we used today." She looked at Mrs. Baker. "Do you remember how to ask if someone has seen something?" Mrs. Baker thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "Oh, yes. I can say, 'Have you seen my necklace?'" Lisa clapped. "That's right." "And what about asking someone if they lost something?" Mr. Thomas raised his hand. "We can say, 'Did you lose something?'" Lisa nodded. "Exactly. And if we want to offer help, what can we say?" Mrs. Baker grinned. "We can say, 'Can I help you?'" Lisa turned to the audience. "Now, it's your turn. Try saying these sentences with me." She paused and spoke slowly. "Have you seen my necklace?" A short pause. "Did you lose something?" Another pause. "Can I help you?" Lisa smiled. "Great job. Now, let's do one more activity." She pointed at the screen. "Imagine you lost your phone on the train. What would you say?" Write your answer in the comments. Mr. Thomas nodded. Practicing like this helped you remember new words. Lisa looked at the audience. Remember, learning English is like solving a mystery one clue at a time. Mrs. Baker chuckled, and it's always more fun when we learn together. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll have more fun mysteries to solve together. The train moved forward, and so did their journey of learning English.